Good morning, everyone. Gemma Moorhead here. I'm Resilient Marketing Lead. I just want to say welcome to those who have joined already. We're going to give it a couple more minutes, just let a couple more people join, and then we'll be starting the session in about 1 to 2 minutes' time. Hi, everyone. Gemma Moorhead here. And welcome to today's session. Thank you very much for joining today. Just before we start, I will need to run through a few housekeeping bits. Firstly, you're all on mute, so if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which will appear at the bottom of your screen. If they are technical, I can answer them to you via the chat box during the session, but if they're subject related, I'll read them out at the end for you to answer, for the team to answer. We are recording the session, and you will be emailed a copy of the recording tomorrow. So just to give you a quick brief agenda, I'm very happy to announce that Jonathan Reuvid and Nick Wilding are joining me. The presentation will be about 45 minutes in length and with 15 minutes Q&A. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jonathan Reuvid.
Hello, good morning. I'm Jonathan Reuvid. I've been involved as an editor and writer of business books on managing risk for more than 20 years. And this first edition of Managing Cybersecurity Risk was published just before Christmas this last year. I'd like to tell you how it came about. It arose really from a series of business conferences on managing data risk in financial services, which I originated and set up from 2012 at the London Stock Exchange. And it became apparent as we went through those sessions, first of all, that cybersecurity risk was growing very sharply, and secondly, that there was a very low awareness outside financial services of how serious the threat was. One very interesting thing was that in the case of the United States, who, as is many things, are ahead of us, the risk had been recognized up to the point that in America, by 2013, 2014, the insurance companies, or the big insurance companies, were actually insisting that their policyholders engaged in taking precautions against cybersecurity infringement and were loading their premium terms if they didn't. So that was one outcome in America, which I don't think has hit us yet in the UK, but it may do. Now, the people who were involved in the conferences and in the book primarily were Don Randall, who was then the head of security at the Bank of England, and Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, who was a Minister of State for Security and at the time was advising the Cabinet on cybersecurity. And it became apparent by 2013 that a good way in order to cascade from what had been learnt through the conferences down to industry in general, particularly smaller businesses that don't have their own in-house CIOs, specialists, was to produce the book. And in looking around for collaborators for the book, the first thing that I wanted to do was to involve an expert in cyber resilience, and therefore selected AXELOS and Nick Wilding, who I had known for some years, as a lead partner in the book. And really, Nick, that's an introduction for you, and maybe you can take it from there.
Many thanks, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I was delighted that we were able to take part and support Jonathan's efforts in producing the book, alongside 3 or 4 other key partners. You've seen their logos on the slide there. What was important for us was that there's this continual need to communicate to as wide an audience as possible in terms of the fact that cyber resilience is all about, effectively, it's about risk mitigation and risk management. It's not about compliance, and as you'll hear from my presentation, I want to emphasize the fact that technology is only one part of an effective response. But more of that in a minute. Firstly, just want to give you a bit of background first, because I suspect that many of you would not have heard of AXELOS. We're a joint venture between the Cabinet Office in the UK government and Capita. So a few years ago, about 4 years ago, the UK government realised that they were sitting on some commercial IP, and they wanted to create a new business model to be more effective in growing the adoption and awareness of that IP. Critically, we're talking around global best practice methodologies and frameworks, and we're talking about ITIL and PRINCE2. So they went out to tender, and Capita won the tender, and AXELOS is the result of that. So AXELOS owns, nurtures and develops global best practice methodologies and frameworks. ITIL and PRINCE2 are the 2 leading ones, and I was brought on board over three years ago to design, launch and now manage new cyber resilience best practice, which we've called Resilia. And Resilia is designed to provide the guidance, the best practice based on experience around the world, and the management processes required for any organisation to integrate cyber resilience, digital resilience across their whole existing management system. And one area that I want to focus on today is to talk about the challenges that all organisations face, to highlight the role that your people and their behaviours play in managing and helping mitigate those risks, and highlighting the fact that there is a very distinct difference between providing training to all of your staff around information security or cyber resilience and providing effective training. And there is quite a distinct difference between the two. So let me kick off with the presentation. I would suggest that there's something missing in our corporate response to the cyber risks that we face. Investment in cyber security technologies continues to go through the roof, and is destined and is predicted to continue to rise significantly. However, at the same time, the scale, the industrialized nature, the scope and the impact of cyber attacks also continues to rise, and is also predicted to continue to rise. And as we've seen with the recent WannaCry attack and the attack that has been on the front pages of all the media in the last 24 hours, this is a problem that is here to stay, and it's not going to get better anytime soon. When I say there's something missing in our corporate response, I'm referring to the fact that the majority of successful cyber attacks is well reported and regularly reported. They succeed because of human error. And typically that's the unwitting actions of anyone in the organisation, regardless of their role or responsibility. So anyone from the boardroom to anyone in the engine room and anyone in between. And as a result, I would suggest we need to recognise that cyber resilience is fundamentally a human and not just a technology issue. The hard reality is that we now all live and work in a highly connected world and a cyber risk environment, one that constantly threatens the information that's most precious to us and the organisations we work for. Hard-won reputations, competitive advantage and operational capabilities are all vulnerable, and organisations now need to be much more alive to the dangers and vigilant and resilient to the attacks when they inevitably come.
Nick, isn't there a hearts and minds issue here in getting boards at the most senior level in a company to actually engage with the problem, rather than thinking that it can be simply shuffled off onto a member of staff?
Absolutely. Around the world, there's a need for boards to be more effective in their response. I'd say that the boardroom have come a long way in the last 3 or 4 years in their awareness and understanding of the impacts and the way in which these risks impact their business. And this is what boards are interested in. They're interested in the way in which cyber risks will impact their strategic mission and vision. Their latest merger and acquisition, their latest development in a new product, or expansion into a new territory, or adoption of new third-party suppliers. So, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Then more needs to be done. However, the security industry, I don't think, has covered itself in too much glory in terms of the way in which it's communicated and guided organisations in the way in which they communicate this to their boards. And there remains a big disconnect in the language that's used between the people that have got the day-to-day responsibility for managing information security and cyber risk and the way in which they communicate that to the board in a way that the board understands what it means to them and the sorts of things that they need to do to take a lead. But hopefully a little bit more of that later on as well. So I think hopefully this, most of us have probably seen this slide. It's the screen grab of the recent WannaCry ransomware attack. One clear message from me on this is that it just highlighted to me just how incredibly easy it is for attackers and attack groups to compromise an organisation's systems. No organisation is immune, and so many organisations are failing to do the simple things well. We hear lots of talk about the impact of robotics and artificial intelligence, and people are getting very excited about that. We just need to make sure that, and particularly the SME part of the marketplace, there are some very simple things that any organisation needs to do well, and that's the basis behind the government cyber essentials scheme and indeed some of the work that we've done within Resilia. It's safe to say that cyber attackers find it easier to influence and communicate with and engage with our staff than we do. That's a big statement, it's a bold statement, but I think that's very real. And I regularly communicate at presentations and with CISOs and chief security officers, and it's something that is generally felt within the market to be true. And to address this, we need to make sure that we are working more effectively at changing, adapting and sustaining behaviours, resilient behaviours across the organisation, providing all of our people from the boardroom down with the very simple, relevant and practical guidance that they need to make the right decisions at the right time. And to reiterate this point about how easy it is and how, in fact, some of us think we're immune. Here's a couple of snippets of conversations that were made public when the chief exec of a global bank and the Director General or the Governor of the Bank of England were recently spoofed by an individual, same individual, who wanted to cause embarrassment by spoofing the chairman's address and was able to carry out these sorts of conversations. And these are public information that are on the web. You know, I don't want to embarrass these organisations. It's just used to show that this is, again, so incredibly easy. We're playing to human vulnerabilities and human behaviours. We're very trusting. We're very curious. And that tends to fall into the hands of the attackers when they develop some of the techniques they use, very easy techniques, to help enable an attack to succeed. We often hear about the sophistication of cyber attacks. I would suggest that the sophistication comes in the development of the actual malware itself. The actual techniques used to open up an organisation's systems still remain very, very easy, and phishing remains the easiest and most effective way to target and compromise an organisation.
I would say, because it's happened to me once or twice, the communication part of it is so simple, because everybody sitting in front of their PC who gets an intriguing email is tempted to make that extra click and to download. And you really do have to consciously steel yourself, if you're not sure or don't know what the source is, simply to junk it.
I agree, Jonathan. It's a delicate balance to play, because so many organisations and different functions within organisations rely on opening up emails and opening attachments up in emails. So it is a very delicate balance to create in terms of ensuring that people always remain vigilant and learn lessons. All I would say is, if you think something is suspicious, it probably is. And it's always better to be safe than sorry. But so as I say, it's for us, it's as much about people and their behaviours and not just about the bits and bytes of the technology. As I said, 90% of all successful cyber attacks rely on human error. More and more firms are beginning to recognise that resilience is fundamentally about their people and behaviours. But they need to develop, embed and sustain these behaviours across their workforce. And there are different ways in which that's done. And I'll come on to some of the techniques that are currently used, which I find are failing to truly engage or are relevant to the people that they're designed for. And as a result are practically worthless. But there are different techniques that can be adopted. Jim Baines, let me tell you again, coming back to this area of some people thinking we're immune. Jim Baines is someone I know well. He is the chief exec of a mid-sized US packaging company. And he's been through the pain of being attacked and being the target of the attack himself. And as a result of something he did, he's had to quickly appreciate just how quickly an attack can have such a catastrophic impact on his organisation and indeed his biggest customers, who were the main target of the attack. They were using him to get to his big customers. As a result of the attack, he wanted to go public, and he's written an open letter to peers of his, other chief execs and board directors, just to create a message to them and to build that sort of understanding amongst that particular community about the nature of the risk. Let me just read out this snippets of this open letter. Cybercrime wasn't on my agenda. It was something I expected my IT team to handle. My CIO had it covered. I expected. It never occurred to me that I might be a target. The stories you read about in the press are usually about an employee who's walked off with sensitive data or criminals targeting customer information. But board members, CEOs, we're immune, aren't we? Wrong. We're actually the best targets, the biggest targets. We're the whales that smart hackers want to harpoon. We know all the secrets. We have privileged access to all the sensitive and lucrative parts of our business. And it makes perfect sense. Why start at the back door when you can go right in at the front? And we as board directors are just as human as everyone else. We make mistakes. We're careless. In fact, we're vulnerable because we think we're immune. And that's what I thought. My company, which I built from nothing from over 30 years, When I put everything on the line, is now losing clients, money, and most importantly, credibility. My reputation's been damaged with my customers and my peers. I'm fighting back, but it's hard. You need to know that you're a target. Everyone on your board is a target. No one is immune and everyone's vulnerable, however powerful or successful they may be. You need to know that and act now. So there's a very impassioned plea from this guy, Jim Baines, and I'll come back to Jim and his story at the end of the presentation.
Yes, he's very articulate, Nick, and the chapter in our book together, which lays out the whole story of what happened, I thought the worst part of that, in a sense, was the fact that the chief executive of one of his associate companies that he did business with lost her job as a result of it.
That's right. And it's you just reminded me, actually, so there is a chapter in your book that's written by Jim Baines.
Yeah, an interview with Jim Baines. Yes, that's right.
So, again, just to sort of build the case, employee vulnerabilities, there's no shortage of stories out there, damaging reports involving organisations of all sizes across multiple sectors. They all succeeded because the attacker was able to exploit our human vulnerabilities. Another little story of mine. I've presented 2 or 3 times with a friend of mine, one of our advisors and partners in the US. He is the CISO of one of the largest retail banks out in the US, and he tells the story of presenting to his main board. This would have been about just over a year ago now. And talking and asking them a very simple question: how many phishing emails do you believe we as an organisation receive every month? And he gave them a list of multiple choice answers. None of them got it right. It's 40 million. And he wanted to ask that to demonstrate just the scale of the challenge that they face. But he wanted to make a much more subtle point, and it comes in the second question, which was: how many of those phishing emails do you believe bypassed the hundreds of millions of dollars investment we've made in technology within our organisation and got through to our people on the front line? And it's seemingly a small number. It's 1%. But that's 1% of a very, very large number. And that's a significant number of different attacks that are going down to and hitting the desktops of their people. And my friend's job is as much about not just protecting and detecting in the first instance, but in detecting a compromise, is making sure that that those are identified and remediated as quickly as possible. And in some instances, he doesn't do that quickly enough, and the danger is it turns into a bigger issue and a bigger challenge than it necessarily needs to be. And his point to the board was, the attackers only need to be lucky once, and they play on our human vulnerabilities to make it easy for them, and that we need to be lucky. His organisation needs to be lucky all the time, and emphasising the point that that is not going to happen. And the day that all organisations, whatever size, whatever sector that they're in, understand that and know that they have been attacked or have been targeted and will be compromised in some way, that'll be a better day when we start to understand some of the wider things that we should be doing to better mitigate the risks that we face. So, some firms, many firms, acknowledge this and carry out information security awareness training for all staff. The IOD, Institute of Directors, published some research about 2 or 3 months ago now in partnership with Barclays. They researched their members, and of those members that were part of the research sample, they identified that 45% of organisations do no information security awareness training amongst their people. I would suggest that the nature of the risks that we face, and with things like GDPR coming over the horizon in May next year, those organisations are going to be much more at risk than any other organisation. Of those that do information security awareness training with their staff, the vast majority of those continue to rely on annual e-learning. And for me, it's like organisations trying to program their people in the same way that they program computers, and then expecting them to behave as instructed. And I'm very pleased to say that doesn't work with people. It does work with computers. And typically these courses it's a one-off course. It's required once, designed once, delivered once. It's completed once. And I would suggest almost completely forgotten at once. And I regularly present this and talk about this at conferences and briefings, look up and I'm faced with a lot of wry smiles and nodding heads, knowing that that's exactly the way that my organisation does it. And this is the case of organisations of all sizes. And we've worked with some very large enterprise organisations that acknowledge the fact that that approach does not work if they want to be serious about changing and sustaining resilient behaviours in their organisation. It does tick the compliance box, and that should not be ignored. The importance of being compliant should not be ignored, absolutely not. But I would suggest the approach does little to change or sustain that behaviour. The other thing is that many organisations I see, when they're implementing any training, they fail to understand the unique approach that's needed to engage their people, and I'll come on to that on the next slide. And there's a piece of research recently, it's about 6 or 7 months ago now, a UK organisation asking, it was around cyber, and they asked members of the public about their perceptions of the nature of the risk, and they found that nearly 40% of UK adults, and clearly we should assume that most of those are in working for organisations, do not know what a phishing attack might look like, or indeed what phishing is. So when we're trying to educate our people, we need to be, again, communicating that in a way that is in plain English and providing very simple practical guidance to help them make those right decisions at the right time. And I would suggest finally on this slide, we all have the potential to be that guy Dave in the boxing ring there, and I've been Dave a few times myself. The other cartoon for me perfectly shows the approach that most organisations take. It's very much you have to do the learning. It's very much again this tick box approach, and people learn because they want to learn, and there's a different approach that needs to be taken when we're trying to educate our people.
Nick, are many companies taking the educational approach of having certificates or diplomas in cybersecurity, where the people who go on a course have a kind of distance learning that involves completing some written work as well as online material and even face-to-face conferencing too? Is anybody doing that yet?
I think there's a need to do that with perhaps their specialist people, the people who've got the day-to-day responsibility for technology, information security, the day-to-day owners of the information and technology within organisations. I would suggest that there's a danger in trying to do that with all staff. For us, all the rest of the staff in organisations, there's obviously a very, very demand that these people are doing what they're meant to be doing, and there's operational demands to make sure that we're not going from famine to feast, where we go from one day where there's no learning, and the next day that everyone's being put on 3-day training courses. So for us, one of the really important things is to make this learning topics short, because it just plays to, and I'll come on to that on the slide after this one. But that's a good point, because I think there is a difference between the type of training that is given to particular people within the same organisation. What we're finding is that many organisations we're working with and talking to, the question there is, what does good and perhaps replace good there with effective awareness learning actually look like? Sorry, just taking a mouthful of water. So when we're talking to organisations and communicating some of the ways in which we think that you can help sustain and develop new behaviours, we do sort of talk about why typical information security awareness programs fail. There are many reasons. As I said, the reliance on checking the box, the failure to acknowledge that awareness is a unique discipline. I see all too often awareness or training seen as sort of, we just send out emails when a latest attack comes out and saying, don't do this, don't do that, without providing any real context to it or understanding. So what does a phishing email look like? How should I respond? What should I do? Why should I care? I've also seen other instances where organisations just fall back on communicating what their company's information security policy is. Well, that's fine. I would suggest that that's quite a dry subject area, and we need to make sure that this is engaging and relevant and something that people are encouraged and incentivized to learn. One of my big frustrations is that the language that people use within the security industry and within technology generally, it is, we do all know some sort of, it's a geek language. It's a language led by technical experts, and the work that they do is absolutely critical. However, when communicating and trying to teach all of your people who are not necessarily specialists or want to care about this stuff, we need to make sure that we're doing that using plain English, that we're communicating in a language that they understand. There's also this reliance on the single learning exercise, and all too often this culture where people are just too scared or worried about admitting that they might have made a mistake and putting their hand up because they're worried about the implications and the consequences of putting their hand up, admitting that they've done something wrong. And we need to work harder at trying to flip this and providing the right incentives and rewards so that there's more carrot than stick. And, as I say, using an approach that the language that we need to make sure that people are just more confident about being able to share this and talk about it. Because all too often, the vast majority of people think that this is a subject that they know very little about. They might read a few stories about it in the media, but they're just worried about showing their own ignorance. And this is something that is absolutely critical. We need to develop this feeling that we can all talk about this safely. Because everybody does have a very specific role to play in protecting their organisation's most valuable information. And for me, it's all about providing the context, an idea of the consequences, and providing that confidence so that this simple, practical advice can be easily adopted, shared, and communicated.
Nick, I think much of the fault for all of this, or the difficulty, lies with the managed service providers, who use language that is so technical that unless you're a nerd, it's almost impossible to engage with them. It's very off-putting. And I speak having trawled, I don't know how many in the last 6 months, because a part of the theme for the second edition of the book is going to be to try to identify the managed service providers that actually do offer an understandable tool set.
I couldn't agree more. They provide an incredibly valuable service, and many of them do it very well. But what we need to understand is that when we read about what they do on their websites, they're communicating with people, wanting to communicate with people that understand this stuff, because they're the people that are going to buy it. The challenge is that, as I said, everybody's got a role to play, and we need to begin to build a different way in which we're talking about this. And this is what the Resilia best practice has tried hard to do, is to build a business language rather than a technical language that surrounds cyber resilience, digital resilience. But I totally agree. And again, that comes back to the point that you sort of highlighted with me earlier on around the boardroom and the disconnect between language that's spoken by the people who have got the responsibility for information security and technology and the language that board directors use. And it's a very, very different language. It's the same as sort of English and Chinese. And for us, a critical opportunity for providing effective awareness learning to all of your people is to get the buy-in, support and sponsorship of your executive team. For us, it's a great opportunity for them to show that they don't believe that they're immune, perhaps even to share a few stories if they're happy to about the fact that they've been guilty of doing something. So to show that they're as human as everyone else. It also is a great opportunity for them to show a clear link between what good information security behaviours look like and delivering and providing that critical link between that and actually helping the business and the organisation deliver on its strategy and its mission. And there's this critical link, there's this sort of positive message around in adopting these behaviours, we're going to be better at what we do. And some of the organisations we're talking to are looking at ways in which they can not only use the services that we offer, but in a range of other services as well, to help differentiate themselves in their own marketplaces to their customers, to say, you can trust us to look after your information more effectively than anybody else. So that's sort of an emerging area. So in understanding all of this, in developing our sort of Resilia awareness learning, which we call Resilia Frontline, we've taken a different approach. We've defined the simple sort of practical best practice guidance that we need to communicate. That very simple, practical guidance that everyone needs to know in different areas. So we've created a whole range of different learning modules, subject areas. So learning in phishing, social engineering, social media, password safety, online safety, information handling, BYOD, etc., etc. And we've combined that by also providing, and we've worked very hard not only with subject matter experts in information security, but also behavioural psychologists who understand how adults learn most effectively, in providing learning in different ways. So people and organisations can design and develop and manage compelling, engaging awareness learning campaigns throughout the year, using short nuggets of information. So it's very much based around a campaign-based approach to learning. So for us, this means short, relevant, engaging learning, regular updates, tests and refreshers to keep up to date with the latest threats to your organisation, and that might be very specific to different industry sectors. The innovative learning tools like games and simulations that make learning fun and immerses people in different scenarios that are relevant to them and their organisations, and tailored learning pathways and diagnostics that provides learning where it's needed most. Because we're actually, organisations are obviously, quite rightly, demanding in ensuring that any learning that they provide to their people is effective and is targeted in a way that in areas that to people that need it most. We want and need people to talk about security and discuss the risks and help each other out more openly. And we feel very strongly that the more people talk about information security to each other, the more resilient we'll become. So just coming to the end of the presentation, some summary thoughts, and this is just some screen grabs from some of the learning that we provide for Resilia Frontline. 5 key lessons really. People pay attention to leaders, so do get the buy-in and involvement at those at the top who can help highlight the positive benefits of resilient behaviours, reward and inspire people across the organisation, and to illustrate and show how seriously the leadership team is committed to protecting their most valuable and precious information. Secondly, memories are fragile. there's plenty of academic research out there that suggests that the typical attention span for most adults is probably about 8 or 9 minutes. I've got 3 young kids. I think when I'm talking to them, it's more like about 30 seconds, but that's neither here nor there. So in understanding that memories are fragile, we need to ensure that we plan to reinforce, refresh, and evolve the learning that we're doing, and we regularly update and re-engineer some of the learning that we're doing. But also combining not just online learning, but with offline activities as well, live events, competitions, surveys, to ensure that you're actively encouraging people to talk about it. Identify champions in your business who can help be the people to champion and evangelize around the importance of this subject. Thirdly, people learn differently. You do need to build a very lively mix of different formats to use in engaging all of your people. Different people learn in different ways, and different people want to learn using other techniques other than just boring e-learning modules that we've seen for the last 2 or 3 years, and we know the answers to the questions to. Fourth, use all means at your disposal. Stay agile, always adapt, fine-tune, pilot new next techniques, and involve your people in the design and not just in the learning. And finally, people remember stories over facts. The thing that truly engages people is stories. Fix the message in your learners' minds by appealing to their hearts. Great campaigns have great stories to tell, and we feel very passionately about this. There is no shortage of statistics and facts in the cyber resilience, the cyber security marketplace that I've seen time and time and time again. It washes over people, and particularly in the boardroom. I think they've been swamped with this sort of data overload, and we need to get that emotional connection to this as an issue, and this is a problem. Which brings me back to Jim Baines, whose letter I read out earlier. Truth of the matter is, I'd spent a lot of time at Detica, my old company, engaging with senior executives, boardroom directors, talking about this as a challenge quite a few years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. And it was clear to me that they do enjoy stories, narrative, anecdotes to communicate their understanding and to try and connect to this is a problem area. So when I started at AXELOS, I identified a guy that knows how to write good thrillers, good stories. He does it for a living. And we gave him a contact, a guy called Jerome Vincent. So basically, Jim Baines is a fictional character, but the story that we tell in this book, Wading for Beginners, is clearly based on real-life events. And we've written it because we want to engage more effectively with people at the top of organizations. The feedback we've had to the book has been fantastic, because we tell a story and we talk about it from a non-technical perspective. We talk about it from talking about the impact on the business, and it's I would say this, wouldn't I? It's a good read, and it's got the good guys and the bad guys. It does sort of play to the secret of a good thriller, and we do like that final quote from Warren Buffett. And it just, he said this many, many years ago, before any of the risks that we face from cyber attacks ever came up. But it takes 20 years to build a reputation, 5 minutes to ruin it. That is so true in today's world when we're dealing with some of the challenges and issues. And there are many organizations today that are dealing with an attack yesterday where that comes into stark reality. So I think that comes to the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time.
Just before we go to some questions, I just wanted to again highlight that we've actually got an offer on. So Legend Business are offering a 25% off the Managing Cybersecurity Risk, and then anyone who buys the book will also get a free copy of Wading for Beginners. So as Nick said, it's a great read, and I also really enjoy the book, and definitely worth one for your train journeys or your tube journeys or plane journeys.
Have you got any
Gemma,
other
thank you.
Jonathan, did you have anything else to add?
I was going to say thank you for the plug for the book. Relating to Nick's point about attention span, those of you who do buy the book will find, whether you use the hard copy or using the digital version, that it's constructed in a way that each chapter is self-standing, and it can be read and digested within 20 minutes, which is what we calculate to be the attention span for busy business people who are traveling and don't have too much time to get to spend on their reading. And
on that, Jonathan, just a little, perhaps we should be thinking about 15-minute, half-hour webinars rather than 1 hour long ones. So
I agree with you. I agree with you, Nick. And also thank you for identifying the topics that you'll be writing on in the second edition of the book.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Brilliant. Right, so we've actually got some questions. I'm just going to move over to the question block. So the first one is still reactive rather than proactive starts within boardrooms. I think that's kind of saying that at the moment there is too much reaction and there's not enough sort of proactive behaviour within the boardroom.
Again, I can only agree with that. The sad truth is that many organisations react to a crisis when it's too late, and we need to get this. It's a very difficult challenge, and we need to get boardrooms and directors understand that this is something they need to prepare for properly. It comes back to this, they need to understand that they are being targeted, they will be attacked. So they need to understand how they're going to respond to any incidents as and when that occurs, if that incident becomes a crisis. We work very closely with a lady who's a compliance director and CISO of a global media group, and she talks about presenting to her board about events, incidents and crises, and very easily communicates just by start numbers the way in which the board, in a way in which the board can understand, because it's the crises that will impact them and the future of their organisation. And I'm pleased to say that since she's been doing that over the last 4 years, she's not had a major crisis in the last 2 years, and a lot of that she puts down to the fact that the power of the way that she's engaged all of her people.
Yeah. Thanks,
Nick, I'd add to. Sorry, Gemma. I was just going to say I would add to that there is another dimension in this for SMEs, or the boards of SMEs, and that's the issue of cost, because always they are looking for solutions that are both effective and affordable, and that's back to the managed service providers or to consultants, advisors like Resilia, that the solutions that are provided need to be something that the board can seriously engage in and feel that they want to do from the point of view of their business plans.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And sadly, again, you see the tech providers selling technology at levels way outside the capability of SMEs to be able to afford it. And our view on that is, effective online learning is, in relation to the investment required for some of these technologies, is very much lower. But the impact of that and the return on that is very much higher, we would suggest, but also plays back to the messages that the National Cybersecurity Centre are quite rightly communicating. Do the simple things well. Patch your systems, which is one of the big messages off the back of the WannaCry attack, and plays to the Cyber Essentials, the importance of doing simple things well.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, both of you. So next question, is the cloud a help or a hindrance for better cyber security?
A good question. I'm not sure I'm perfectly able to be in a position to answer that. There are some very good cloud providers out there that have, and actually to outsource your information and provide and allow them to host your information in the cloud sometimes is more effective than doing it yourself, because they have the skills, if you choose wisely, and the expertise to ensure that that information, your information, would be perhaps safer than in your existing organisation, where you might not have the skills, the time, the resources, and the money to do that effectively. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's my take on that.
Jonathan, have you got any thoughts on that question?
No, I agree with that entirely. It's a matter of security. If you're happy with your cloud service and you feel their security is strong, you need to use it as a support.
Yeah, definitely. It can open up many benefits for an organisation in terms of flexibility as well.
Absolutely.
So next question, is there a dependency on the preferred learning method of the recipient? For example, I prefer tutor classroom learning.
So I think if organisations can, firstly, they need to understand that different people learn in different ways. So we're dealing with adults here that just offering one solution, i.e. a long e-learning package once a year, not effective. Yes, and we work with organisations that do combine online and offline activities, so lunch and learn sessions.
Away days.
Yeah, again, and that, because online learning is ultimately still a relationship between you and your laptop effectively. And if that's supported by a lot of offline activities where you're bringing teams together, companies together, as I say, to share, to talk, to learn, I think that's the most effective way of doing it. So that's my view on that.
Anything to add, Jonathan?
No, not at all. I agree completely.
I think also this one picks up on the 90% fact, Nick, that 90% of successful attacks are due to human error, and that means that they can be their most important and effective defence as well. So it's all about people, so you need to understand how your people learn to then be able to tailor the learning to them.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Brilliant. So another question we've got here is, how do you persuade resistant users, managers, organisations to incorporate this repetitive practice into their ways of working?
The simple answer to that is it's difficult. It is difficult. It's a bit like the drink driving laws. There will always be people who drink and drive. Whatever you do, whether you regulate against it, public information films, there will campaigns. There will always be people that say, "Doesn't affect me. I'm going to carry on drink driving." And likewise, there will always be people in your organisations who think that they know best and have their own little workarounds and and think they're immune. Wherever they may be. So it's not easy. I'll be the first to say that. Two things there. One is providing effective learning is all about, again, risk management. It's about mitigating the risks that you face as an organisation more effectively, and more effectively than other organisations in your sector, your competitors. And it's often the case that attackers and attack groups, if they find it slightly more difficult to actually compromise one particular organisation, they'll go somewhere else quickly. They adapt quickly, and that's the approach that they take. In terms of trying to, there is this stick and carrot as well, and I've spoken a lot about rewarding and incentivizing people with the right behaviours. I think it is also important to have that carrot as well, and we need to start identifying those people that continue to display the behaviours that we as an organisation are trying to tackle. And it's getting easier and will be easier to identify who those people are. So it is a balanced approach. I would always say that the emphasis must be on reward and inspiring and engaging. But yes, ultimately there will always need to be a case of identifying the people that are not doing what they need to be doing. It is difficult. This is not easy. But as I say, that in adopting an approach that is clearly more effective on an ongoing basis, hopefully that is one way in which that those behaviours of the hard users, as it were, can begin to change.
Thanks. Anything else to add, Jonathan?
No, absolutely not.
Well, I think the books would be good. I'll put them on someone's desk.
Yes, should be compulsory reading.
Yes. Great stuff. Well, we haven't got any more questions at the moment, so I don't think Nick and Jonathan, anything else for you?
No, I'm fine.
No? Brilliant. Great.
No,
Well,
I'm
thank
fine.
you so much.
I'm good.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to Nick and Jonathan for hosting this, and thanks everyone for joining. Just before we go, we do have a quick questionnaire which will pop up at the end of the session. It would be great if you could complete it and tell us what you liked, didn't like, and how we can improve any next sessions.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. Any questions, please do contact myself or Jem or Jonathan. We'd be happy to answer any questions after this webinar.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.